He returned to his old town, not because he wanted to, but because he had nowhere left to go. Beside him, the dog didn't just walk. It paused, observed, and chose the path for him. A small trace from the past led him to the father he believed had abandoned him. But what he saw
it's just through here.
Didn't match his memory and didn't match the truth.
If we
Piece
move
by
through
piece,
this sector,
every detail,
we can
every
bypass
number,
the checkpoint.
every word began to reveal
It's
a
risky.
different story.
The terrain is too exposed there.
And maybe the man he blamed for 20 years had never truly left. Where are you watching from? Like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 followers so we can keep telling meaningful stories. Now, let's begin the story. Elias Vance did not return because he wanted to. He returned because stopping felt easier than continuing. The road into the northern town stretched long and quiet, flanked by pine trees that carried the weight of winter even when the sky was clear. The light here was different, paler, thinner, as if it had traveled too far and arrived tired. It touched everything without warming it. Elias drove without music. He preferred it that way. Silence made things simple. It kept thoughts from forming into something heavier. At 35, Elias had the kind of presence that didn't need to announce itself. He stood just over 6 feet tall, his build lean but solid, shaped not by vanity but by years of function. His face was clean-shaven, sharp in structure, square jaw, defined cheekbones, the kind of features that carried discipline even at rest. His dark brown hair was cut short in a military style, though slightly longer than strict regulation, enough to show he was no longer under constant command. His skin, once lighter, had been worn down by cold winds and long deployments. It held a faint roughness now, a memory of places harsher than this town. But it was his eyes that stayed with people, gray-blue, steady, never rushing to judgment, yet never missing anything either. The kind of eyes that had learned to observe before reacting. He wore the same clothes he always did, an old tactical combat shirt in faded olive gray, softened by time and wear. The cuffs were slightly frayed, the shoulders carrying a pale discoloration from countless washes. Beneath it, a dark red thermal shirt showed faintly at the collar, the color just a shade warmer than the rest of him. His combat pants, earth-toned and worn at the knees, moved easily with him, though they had long since lost the crispness of new fabric. His boots were scuffed, reliable. On his wrist, an old military watch, scratched but still precise. Everything about him said one thing: he did not replace what still worked. In the passenger seat, Orion sat upright, alert but calm. The German Shepherd was 5 years old, his coat a blend of sable tones, cream, gray, and black, shifting under the light depending on how he moved. His body was lean, built for endurance rather than show, every muscle defined through use rather than training alone. His amber eyes moved constantly, scanning, reading. Orion was not a pet. He was a partner. His harness was black, edged with a subtle dark red trim, practical and worn just enough to show it had been used often. A handle ran along the top, though Elias rarely needed it. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The truck slowed as they entered town. Nothing had changed. That was the first thing Elias noticed. The same buildings, the same quiet streets, the same absence of unnecessary movement. People here did not rush. They did not pry. They saw, but they did not ask. It was the kind of place where a man could disappear without being chased, or stay without being questioned. Elias parked near the edge of town and stepped out, the cold air settling against his skin like something familiar rather than unwelcome. He didn't go home. Not yet. Instead, He walked. Orion fell into step beside him immediately, neither ahead nor behind. Perfect alignment. The leash hung loose between them. They moved without destination, past houses that had aged without collapsing, past windows that reflected light but revealed little. Somewhere, a dog barked once, and then stopped. A door closed. A car passed slowly, tires crunching against the thin frost. Everything was exactly as it should be, until it wasn't. They approached an old gas station at the edge of the road. It had been closed for years. The sign was gone, the windows boarded, the structure left behind as if someone had meant to return but never did. Elias didn't slow. Orion did. The dog stopped so suddenly the leash tightened for a brief second before Elias instinctively halted. He looked down. Orion wasn't tense. That was the first thing Elias noticed. There was no raised fur, no low growl, no shift in weight that suggested threat. His ears were forward, his posture still, but not defensive. Just focused. Elias followed his gaze. There was nothing. Wind moved lightly across the empty lot. The boards creaked faintly. Snow remnants clung to the edges of concrete, melting unevenly. "Move," Elias said quietly. Orion didn't. That alone was enough to change something. Orion did not ignore commands. Not without reason. Elias scanned again, slower this time. Still nothing. But Orion wasn't scanning. He was looking at a specific point, an invisible line drawn between scent and memory. Then the dog inhaled. Once, twice, slow, deliberate. Elias felt it then. Faint, almost gone. But there, oil, old oil, machine oil, not fresh, not recent, something that had soaked into surfaces long ago and refused to leave completely. Elias's jaw tightened slightly. A memory surfaced before he could stop it. A garage. Dim light. Cold concrete. The smell of metal and grease thick in the air. A hand, larger than his, steady, coated in oil, moving with quiet precision. And a voice. Doesn't need to be clean, just needs to run. Elias exhaled slowly. He hadn't thought about that in years, didn't want to. He stepped forward, pulling gently on the leash. "Let's go." Orion hesitated for half a second longer, then followed. They continued walking. The town resumed its quiet rhythm around them, as if nothing had happened. But something had shifted. Elias didn't notice it immediately. Not in thought, not in action, but in the way he moved. Before, his steps had been even, unbroken. Now there was a pause between them, a fraction longer, as if part of him was waiting for something else to interrupt. They passed another stretch of empty road when Orion stopped again. This time, it wasn't the same kind of stop. He didn't look forward. He turned, slowly, back toward the gas station they had already left behind. The leash went still. Elias didn't move. Orion didn't pull. He just stood there, staring at something that wasn't there anymore. Then, without warning, Orion stepped forward, not back toward the station, but ahead, as if he had made a decision, not to stay, but to remember. Elias frowned slightly. "Yeah," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than the dog. "Not happening." He didn't go back. He didn't investigate further, because there was nothing to investigate. Just an old place, an old smell, an old memory, and he had already lived that once. That was enough. The sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows across the road. The light turned colder, sharper. Elias adjusted his sleeves slightly, the fabric rough against his skin. Orion walked beside him again, calm as before, but not quite the same. There was a subtle change in him now, something quieter, deeper, not alert, not tense, just aware. as if he had found something he hadn't been looking for, and chosen not to leave it behind. Elias reached the edge of town again, where the road curved slightly toward the old neighborhood. He stopped. For a moment, he considered turning, going back to the house, seeing what was left. Then he shook his head once. Not today. He wasn't here for that. He wasn't here for anything. That was the point. He turned away from the road. Tomorrow, he said, though he didn't know what that meant. Orion didn't respond. He didn't need to. They walked back toward the truck. The town remained silent, unquestioning, unchanged, but Elias felt it now, faint and unwelcome. Not a memory, not yet, just a feeling that something hadn't been left behind as completely as he had believed, and that whatever it was had just started to move again. Morning in the northern town did not arrive with sound. It arrived with light. A thin, pale wash of it stretched across the wooden walls of the room Elias had rented. Nothing permanent, nothing personal, just a place to sleep without questions. The light crept slowly, as if unsure whether it was welcome, sliding across the worn floorboards and stopping just short of the bed where Elias lay awake. He hadn't slept much, not because of discomfort. The bed was firm, the room quiet. It was the kind of place built for people who didn't stay long enough to need comfort. It was the stillness that kept him awake. Not the absence of noise, but the absence of interruption. Elias sat up, the motion controlled, economical. Years of habit meant he never moved more than necessary. His shirt, the same faded olive gray tactical fabric, creased softly as he reached for his boots. The cold had settled into the room overnight, not biting, just present, like something that had always belonged there. Orion was already awake. The German shepherd sat near the door, posture upright but relaxed, his head angled slightly toward the outside as if listening to something too faint for human ears. His sable coat caught the early light in layers, gray blending into black along his back, lighter cream tones along his chest and legs. His amber eyes flicked once toward Elias, then back to the door, waiting, not for a command, for a direction. Elias stood, adjusting his sleeves out of habit. He didn't ask why the dog was alert. He had learned not to question Orion's awareness too quickly. "Let's move." Orion stood immediately, no hesitation. The town felt different in the morning. Not louder, not busier. Just awake in a quieter way. A woman swept the front of a small shop with slow, deliberate strokes. A truck idled near the far end of the street, exhaust curling into the cold air. Somewhere, metal clanged lightly. Someone working, not rushing. Elias walked without urgency. He didn't return to the gas station. He didn't look back, but Orion did. Not physically, not obviously. There was a slight shift in the dog's pace, a fraction slower, a subtle delay when they passed the same stretch of road. Elias noticed. He didn't comment. The small grocery store sat near the center of town, its wooden sign slightly tilted, the paint faded but still legible. It looked like it had been there longer than most of the people who walked past it. Elias stepped inside. Warm air greeted him. Not strong, but enough to soften the edges of the cold outside. The space smelled faintly of dried goods, wood, and something older. Time itself, perhaps. Behind the counter stood a woman. She was in her early 60s, though her posture carried a quiet strength that made her seem younger in certain moments. Her hair, once dark, had faded into a soft gray, pulled back loosely at the nape of her neck. Strands had escaped, framing a face lined not by hardship alone, but by observation, years of watching, remembering and choosing when to speak. Her eyes were sharp, not suspicious, just aware. "Mornin'," she said, her voice steady, unhurried. Elias gave a slight nod. "Morning." She looked at Orion, then back at Elias. "Dog's trained." Not a question. Elias didn't confirm it. "He listens." The woman smiled faintly at that. "They always do. It's the rest of us that don't." There was no judgment in her tone, just fact. She moved slowly behind the counter, placing a few items in order, though they didn't seem out of place to begin with. "Name's Martha," she added. "Martha Cole." Elias hesitated for a second. Names mattered here. They stayed. "Elias." She nodded once, as if filing it away without needing to revisit it. "You just passing through?" she asked. Elias didn't answer immediately. "I'm here." That was enough. Martha didn't push further. She reached for a cloth, wiping down the counter in slow, even motions. "There's a man out by the lake," she said after a moment, as if the thought had simply arrived. "Fixes things. Metal, mostly. Doesn't talk much." Elias glanced up. He hadn't asked. Martha met his gaze. "People don't go there unless they need something," she continued. "He doesn't come into town unless he has to." A pause. "Some folks say he's been around a while. Others say he wasn't here before winter." Elias said nothing. Martha's eyes softened just slightly. "He keeps to himself," she added. "That usually means one of two things." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Elias left the store with nothing in his hands. Orion stepped outside first this time, not leading, but choosing direction. He turned toward the road that curved away from the center of town, toward the lake. Elias stopped. For a moment he considered turning the other way. He had no reason to go, no objective, no mission. Just a suggestion from a woman who hadn't asked him anything he wasn't willing to answer, and a dog that had decided something without explanation. Elias exhaled slowly. "Fine," he muttered under his breath. He followed. The path toward the lake wasn't marked. It didn't need to be. The trees opened gradually, the ground shifting underfoot. Less packed, more natural. The air carried a different scent here. Cleaner, colder. Beneath it, something faint, metal, old. Orion slowed. Not stopping. Just adjusting. His ears moved independently now, catching subtle changes. His head dipped once, then lifted again. Reading. They reached the edge of the lake. It stretched wide and still, a thin layer of ice clinging to parts of its surface, reflecting the pale sky in fractured lines. The shoreline was uneven, dotted with rocks and sparse vegetation. And there, off to the side, stood a small structure. Not quite a shed, not quite a home. Built from mismatched wood panels, reinforced in places where time had tried to take hold. Elias didn't approach immediately. He watched. A figure moved near the structure. Slow, deliberate. A man. Orion stopped before Elias could. Not abruptly this time. Gradually, his body lowered slightly. Not in submission, not in fear, but in a kind of measured acceptance. Then something changed. For a brief second, Orion's posture shifted. His muscles tensed, his head angled forward as if preparing to react. A warning. Small, controlled, almost invisible. And then, it was gone. He exhaled and stepped forward, choosing again. Elias felt it. That brief tension. That moment where the dog had almost decided differently. He didn't understand it, and that made it matter more. The man by the structure didn't look up right away. He worked with his hands. Steady, precise movements, adjusting something metallic that Elias couldn't fully see from a distance. His build was thinner than Elias expected. Not weak, but worn down, like something that had endured more than it had been repaired. His shoulders carried a slight forward bend, not from age alone, but from habit. Years spent leaning over work that required focus more than strength. His hair was gray, unevenly cut, as if maintained without concern for appearance. A short beard covered his jaw, not carefully trimmed, but not completely neglected either. His clothes were layered, an old coat in faded brown, worn at the edges, over a thick shirt that had likely seen better years. Everything about him was functional, nothing unnecessary, nothing for show. Elias stepped closer. The man finally looked up. His eyes were not what Elias expected. They weren't distant. They weren't lost. They were controlled, measured, like someone who had spent a long time deciding what to reveal and what to keep. They held Elias's gaze for a moment, then shifted slightly, to Orion. A flicker? Recognition? No, not recognition. Something else. Understanding. Didn't expect company, the man said. His voice was rough but not weak. Unused, perhaps. Elias stopped a few steps away. He stopped, Elias said, nodding slightly toward Orion. Not me. The man glanced at the dog again. They usually know before we do, he said quietly. Elias didn't respond. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Just present. The man returned to his work, as if the conversation had already ended. Elias watched him. The way his hands moved. The way he held the tool. There was something familiar there. Not in memory, in rhythm. Elias turned slightly, preparing to leave. This wasn't what he came for. He didn't even know what that was. But this wasn't it. Not yet. As he stepped back, the man spoke again. Not loudly, not urgently, just enough to be heard. Some things, he said, without looking up, don't open the way you think they do. Elias stopped, just for a second. Then continued walking. He didn't turn around. But this time, he didn't dismiss it either. Elias didn't return to the lake that day. Not because he had decided anything, because he didn't need to. That was what he told himself as he walked back through town, Orion moving beside him in quiet synchronization, the leash still loose between them. The afternoon light had shifted again, sharper now, cutting longer shadows across the road, stretching everything just slightly out of proportion. It made familiar places feel less certain. Elias didn't like that. He preferred clean lines, defined edges, things that could be measured, verified, closed. What he had just seen at the lake didn't fall into any of those categories. A man who worked with tools like he had done it his entire life. A voice that chose words carefully, like every sentence had already been tested before it was spoken. And a dog, his dog, that had not reacted the way it should have. Elias exhaled slowly. He didn't chase thoughts. He broke them down. And right now, the simplest conclusion was this. The man knew something. Not who Elias was. Not yet. But something close enough to matter. The house stood at the far edge of the neighborhood, untouched in the way abandoned things often are when no one claims them and no one questions their existence. Elias hadn't come back here in years, not physically. In his mind, it had been sealed, closed with the kind of certainty that doesn't allow room for doubt. He stood at the edge of the yard for a long moment before stepping forward. Orion didn't hesitate. That was new. The dog moved ahead slightly, not pulling but no longer waiting for direction either. His head was lower now, nose working the air in short, controlled breaths. His ears flicked once, catching sounds Elias couldn't yet hear. Not alert. Focused. The front door was still locked. Elias reached into his pocket, pulling out a key he hadn't used in over a decade. It felt lighter than he remembered. Or maybe that was just time removing the weight he had once attached to it. The lock resisted at first, then turned. The door opened with a low creak that echoed farther than it should have. The air inside was stale but not decayed. Dust had settled, but not thickly. The place had been left, not destroyed. Elias stepped in. Everything looked smaller. That was the first thing he noticed. The hallway, the walls, even the ceiling. It all seemed reduced, as if memory had expanded it over time and reality had simply refused to keep up. He moved slowly, boots quiet against the wooden floor. The living room sat exactly where it had always been. The couch still there. The table still in place. Nothing rearranged, nothing disturbed. A place paused mid-life. Orion moved ahead again, his pace steady, not hesitant. He didn't check corners. He didn't sweep the room the way he would in an unfamiliar environment. He walked like he had already decided something about this place. Elias watched him, then followed. The garage door was closed. It always had been, even back then. Elias reached for the handle and pulled. It stuck. For a moment, irritation flickered, quick, controlled. He adjusted his grip, pulling again with more pressure. The door gave way, opening just enough to let in a strip of cold light. The smell hit him immediately. Oil, metal, time. It wasn't strong, but it didn't need to be. It settled into him the way certain memories do, not through force, but through recognition. Elias stepped inside. The space was exactly as he remembered. Workbench against the wall. Tools arranged, not perfectly, but deliberately. Shelves holding parts that had never been labeled, only known. He didn't move toward anything right away. He stood, letting the space settle, letting the past exist without forcing it forward. Orion entered behind him, slower this time. The dog paused at the threshold, not out of fear, out of consideration. Then he stepped in. Orion stopped near the center of the garage, not at the workbench, not near the door, but at a spot Elias didn't recognize as important. The dog lowered his head slightly, sniffing once, then twice. Then he did something Elias had never seen before. He looked back at him, not for a command, not for permission, but with a stillness that felt intentional, as if he was asking a question Elias didn't yet understand. Elias frowned. What? The word came out softer than he expected. Orion didn't move. He shifted his weight once, then stepped to the side, clearing space. Elias hesitated, then moved forward. There was nothing visible. Just the concrete floor, worn smooth in places, marked faintly by years of use. Elias crouched down, ran his fingers across the surface. Cold, solid, normal. He exhaled through his nose, a slight shake of his head. Not seeing it. Orion didn't react. He remained where he was, watching, waiting. Elias stood again, turning away. Enough. He didn't have time to chase instincts, not when they didn't lead anywhere. He moved to the workbench instead. That made more sense. That was where things had always been. His hand hovered over the surface before resting on it. The wood was worn smooth in places, rough in others. It held the imprint of years, small dents, scratches, marks that meant nothing to anyone who hadn't been there. Elias opened a drawer. Empty. Another. Tools. He paused, picked one up, a wrench, standard size, balanced weight, used, but maintained. That was the difference. Even after all this time, nothing here had been neglected. It had been left. Carefully. Elias set the wrench down. Something about that didn't sit right. If a man abandoned everything, truly abandoned it, things don't stay like this. They decay. They scatter. They lose intention. This place still had intention. Elias stepped back, looked at the entire space again, not as a memory, as a system, and for the first time, he saw the absence, the box. It should have been there. A small metal box, tucked just beneath the edge of the workbench, half hidden but always reachable. He remembered it clearly now. Not because it mattered then, but because it had always been there, and now it wasn't. Elias felt a tightening in his chest. Not panic, recognition. Something didn't match. And that was enough. He turned sharply and walked back toward the center of the garage, to where Orion had stopped. The dog hadn't moved. Not a step. Elias crouched again. This time he looked closer, not at the surface, at the edges. There, just barely visible, a thin line, a seam, not natural, not accidental. Elias ran his fingers along it, found the corner, pressed. Nothing. He shifted pressure, adjusting instinctively, not force, leverage. The panel lifted slightly. Elias froze, then slowly pulled it up. Beneath it, a shallow compartment, empty, but not unused. There were marks, scratches, the shape of something that had been there for a long time, and removed. Elias stared at it. His mind moved quickly now, assembling, testing, rejecting. The man at the lake. The words he had chosen. Some things don't open the way you think they do. Elias exhaled slowly. Not frustration. Not yet. Something else. A shift. He placed the panel back down carefully. Stood. Orion stepped closer this time, stopping just beside him. Not touching, but near enough. Elias looked at the dog. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Elias nodded once. Not agreement? Acknowledgement? You saw it first. Orion blinked once. Calm. Certain. Elias turned toward the door. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate either, because this wasn't a question anymore. It was a direction. He stepped outside, the cold air sharper now, cutting through the space he had just left behind. The town looked the same, quiet, unchanged. But Elias didn't feel it that way anymore. Something had moved, not in the town, in him. He walked toward the road. Orion fell into step beside him. No tension, no urgency, just forward. And for the first time since he arrived. Elias wasn't walking without purpose. He didn't have answers, but he had something better. A place to return to, and a reason to do it. Elias didn't go back to the lake immediately. That was the first decision he made that wasn't automatic. He stayed in town. Not because he was avoiding anything, because he needed distance. The garage had given him something real, something that didn't rely on memory or interpretation. A hidden compartment, physical, measurable, undeniable. But it hadn't given him answers. Only a question that refused to settle. Who removed it? And why had it been left hidden in the first place? Elias walked the streets again, but this time he wasn't moving without purpose. His steps had direction now, even if he hadn't fully acknowledged it yet. Orion moved beside him, quieter than usual. Not slower, just less reactive. The dog wasn't scanning as much as before. He wasn't tracking movement, scent, or sound in the way Elias had grown used to. He was waiting. That bothered Elias more than anything else. The bank sat near the older part of town. It was smaller than Elias remembered, like everything else. The brick exterior had faded over time, the edges softened by weather. The windows reflected the pale sky without revealing much of what lay inside. Elias stepped through the door. The warmth hit him first, followed by the faint scent of paper and old wood. Behind the counter stood a man in his late 50s. He was tall, though slightly bent forward at the shoulders, as if years of leaning over desks had shaped his posture. His hair was thin and gray, combed carefully to one side, not out of vanity but habit. His face was narrow, lines etched around his mouth and eyes, not from laughter, but from restraint. He wore a button-down shirt under a faded vest, sleeves rolled just enough to show he still worked with his hands when needed. His fingers were long, slightly trembling when still, but steady when moving with purpose. His eyes lifted when Elias entered, sharp, calculating. "Help you?" he asked. His voice carried the tone of someone who had learned to speak carefully. Elias approached the counter. "I'm looking for account records," he said. The man's expression didn't change. "Those aren't public," he replied evenly. Elias nodded. "I figured." A pause. Elias didn't push. He didn't introduce himself, didn't explain. Instead, he placed something on the counter. A folded piece of paper, one of the notes from the box. The man's eyes dropped to it. Just for a second. That was enough. His fingers stilled, then resumed movement, slow, controlled. "You should be careful what you bring into places like this," he said quietly. Elias didn't respond. The man looked up again. This time there was something else in his gaze. Recognition, not of Elias, of the situation. "What exactly are you looking for?" he asked. Elias held his gaze. "Something that doesn't match." The man exhaled slowly, not tired, measured. "Everything matches," he said. "Until it doesn't," Elias replied. Silence stretched between them. The man glanced toward the back room, then back at Elias. "You didn't get that from here," he said. "No." Another pause, then quieter. "Where?" Elias didn't answer. The man studied him for a long moment. Then something in his posture shifted. Not relaxed, resigned. "Come back later," he said. "End of the day." Elias nodded once. That was enough. Outside, the air felt colder than before. Not because the temperature had changed, because something had. Orion stepped out first again, pausing just beyond the doorway. He didn't move immediately. His head tilted slightly, ears adjusting. Not sharply, just enough to catch something faint. Elias followed his line of sight. A car sat across the street, engine off, windows dark. Nothing unusual, except it hadn't been there before. Elias didn't stare, didn't react. He turned away, continuing down the street as if nothing had changed. Orion followed, but not before glancing back once. They didn't go far, just enough to create space. Elias stopped near an empty stretch of road, his eyes scanning the reflective surfaces around him. Windows, metal, anything that could show movement without direct observation. The car remained where it was, unmoving, unnecessary. Elias exhaled slowly. "Not local," he murmured. Orion's posture shifted slightly, not aggressive but alert enough to acknowledge the change. Elias didn't pursue it, not yet, because the pattern mattered more than the presence. As they turned a corner, Orion stopped again. Not sharply, not gradually. He froze. Completely. Elias felt the leash tighten slightly this time. Different from before. Orion wasn't focused on something ahead. He was listening. His body angled just enough to suggest direction, but not toward the road, not toward the buildings. Behind. Elias didn't turn immediately. He waited. Counted 2 seconds, 3, then shifted his position just enough to catch a reflection in a nearby window. A figure. Far back. Not close enough to be obvious. Not far enough to be coincidence. Moving at their pace, then stopping. Just as Orion did. Elias straightened and kept walking. He didn't confront it, didn't acknowledge it. Because now it wasn't a question of whether something was wrong. It was a question of how long it had been wrong. The day moved slower after that. Not in time, in awareness. Every step had weight now. Every sound carried potential meaning. Orion stayed close, closer than before. Not out of fear, out of alignment. Elias returned to the bank as the light began to fade. The man was still there, waiting. The door closed behind Elias with a soft click. No other customers, no movement, just the two of them. The man didn't speak immediately. He walked toward the back room, gesturing slightly for Elias to follow. Elias did. The room was small. Files lined the walls, old, organized, untouched. The man moved to a cabinet, opening it slowly. "You didn't get that from here," he said again, quieter now. "No." The man nodded. "I figured." He pulled out a folder, set it on the table, but didn't open it. Instead, he looked at Elias. "You understand what you're asking?" he said. Elias met his gaze. "Yes." The man studied him for a long moment, then shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "You don't." A pause. Then, "You think you're looking for a mistake?" Elias didn't respond. The man continued. "You're not." He placed his hand on the folder. "You're looking for something that was made to look right." Elias felt it then. Not surprise. Confirmation. The man opened the folder. Inside were records. Clean, precise, too precise. Elias stepped closer. His eyes moved across the pages quickly, then slower. Numbers, dates, patterns. At first glance, nothing wrong. Then, there it was. Small, subtle, a delay. Transactions that should have aligned. Didn't. Not by much. Just enough. Elias leaned back slightly. "That's not an error," he said. The man shook his head. "No." "Then what is it?" The man didn't answer immediately. He closed the folder halfway. His fingers rested on the edge, steady now. "It's design," he said finally. Elias held his gaze. "Why show me?" The man hesitated. For the first time since Elias had met him, uncertainty crossed his face. Then he exhaled. "Because you already saw it," he said. A pause. "And because someone else is going to notice that you saw it." Elias didn't ask who. He already knew the answer wouldn't come easily. The man closed the folder completely. "You should stop," he said, not as a warning, as a fact. Elias didn't move. Orion stepped forward slightly, positioning himself just within reach of Elias's side. Not blocking, not guarding, present. Elias looked at the man one last time. "Name," he said. The man hesitated. Then, "Kelman," he replied. "Arthur Kelman." Elias nodded once. He didn't thank him, didn't need to. He turned and walked out. Outside, the air had settled into night. Colder now, sharper. Elias stepped onto the street, Orion beside him. The car was gone. The figure was gone. But the absence didn't bring relief. It confirmed something else. Elias adjusted his sleeve slightly, the worn fabric familiar against his skin. He didn't look back, didn't slow down. Because now, this wasn't about whether something didn't match. It was about how long it had been made to look like it did. And that answer wasn't going to be simple. Elias didn't go back to the bank. Not the next morning. Not after that. He didn't need more confirmation. He already had enough to understand one thing clearly. What he had believed for 20 years had not been built on truth. It had been built on something designed to look like it. That realization didn't hit all at once. It settled slowly, like cold seeping into bone, quiet, steady, impossible to ignore once it was there. Elias stood outside the motel room, adjusting the sleeve of his worn tactical shirt. The fabric caught slightly at the frayed edge near his wrist. He didn't fix it. He rarely fixed things that still worked. Orion stood beside him, calm but not passive. The dog's posture had changed again. Not tense, not waiting, aligned. That was the only word Elias could attach to it. Aligned with something Elias hadn't fully caught up to yet. "Let's go," Elias said. This time, he didn't pretend there wasn't a direction. The path to the lake felt shorter. Not because the distance had changed, because Elias didn't hesitate. The trees parted the same way, the cold air carrying that faint metallic scent beneath the surface. The lake stretched out ahead, pale and still, holding its quiet like it had nothing to give. The structure stood where it had before, unchanged. The man was there again, working. Elias didn't stop at a distance this time. He walked straight toward him. Orion stayed close, not ahead, not behind, just within reach. The man didn't look up immediately. His hands moved with the same controlled precision, adjusting a piece of metal that didn't seem important enough to demand that level of attention. But it did to him. That was clear. Elias stopped a few feet away. "Your directions were incomplete," he said. The man's hands paused, not abruptly, just long enough to acknowledge the words. Then he set the tool down, slowly. He turned. Up close, the details were clearer. The lines on his face weren't just from age. They were from restraint, from holding back reactions long enough that they had nowhere left to go except inward. His beard was uneven, not from neglect, but from disinterest. His eyes, gray, faded but steady, didn't avoid Elias. They measured him. "You followed them anyway," the man said. Not a question. Elias held his gaze. They weren't wrong. The man nodded once. "Didn't say they were." Elias stepped closer. "You knew about the compartment." A pause. The man's shoulders shifted slightly. Not defensive, just aware. "I knew there was something you hadn't seen yet," he replied. "That's not the same thing." "No," the man agreed. "It isn't." Elias studied him. There was no urgency in the way the man spoke, no attempt to convince. That was what made it harder. "You could have told me exactly where to look," Elias said. The man's expression didn't change. "And you would have believed me?" he asked. Elias didn't answer, because the answer was obvious, no. The man nodded slightly, as if confirming something he had already expected. "That's the problem with being certain," he said. "It closes the only door that matters." Elias felt something shift in his chest. Not agreement, recognition. But he didn't say it. Orion moved then, not toward Elias, toward the man. Slowly, carefully. His steps were deliberate, each one placed with intention rather than instinct. For a moment, Elias felt a flicker of tension. Small, controlled, but there. Orion stopped just short of the man, close enough to reach, close enough to choose. The dog lowered his head slightly, not in submission, not in fear, in acknowledgement. And the man did not move, did not reach out, did not react. He simply stood there, allowing the space to remain what it was, unforced, unclaimed. Orion exhaled softly, then sat. Elias had seen the dog sit before, but never like that. Not without a command, not without purpose. This wasn't obedience. This was a decision. Elias looked between them. "You trained him?" he asked. The man shook his head. "No." Then what is that? The man glanced at Orion, then back at Elias. That's him deciding something, he said. Elias didn't like that answer, because it made sense. The man turned slightly, walking toward the edge of the structure where a small crate sat against the wall. He opened it, rummaging through its contents without urgency. You went to the bank, he said. Elias didn't respond. You saw enough to stop asking the wrong questions, the man continued. Elias stepped forward. I saw patterns, he said. I saw design. The man nodded. That's all you're supposed to see. Elias narrowed his eyes slightly. What does that mean? The man pulled something from the crate, a small piece of metal, worn, insignificant on its own. He turned it in his hand before setting it down on the work surface. It means, he said, the truth was never removed. Elias held his gaze. Then what was? The man didn't answer immediately. He adjusted the metal piece slightly, aligning it with something only he seemed to understand. Then, quietly, the context. Elias frowned. That's not an answer. It is, the man replied. Just not the one you want. Elias felt the irritation rise. Quick, controlled, familiar. He kept it contained. Start making sense, he said. The man looked at him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then the man exhaled slowly. Not tired, resolute. I don't need you to believe me, he said. Elias didn't react. That's convenient, he replied. The man gave the faintest hint of a smile. Not for me, he said. For you. Elias's jaw tightened slightly. Then why say anything at all? The man's gaze shifted briefly to Orion, then back. Because you're already listening, he said. Elias almost responded, almost dismissed it, but something stopped him. Not logic, not evidence, just the absence of resistance. And that was new. The man stepped back, wiping his hands slowly on a cloth that had seen years of use. There's someone you need to talk to, he said. Elias didn't move. Already did. The man shook his head. No, not like this. A pause. Arthur showed you the surface. Elias's eyes narrowed slightly. And you're going to show me what? He asked. The man didn't answer directly. He turned away, picking up the same tool he had been using earlier. Not me, he said. I'm just pointing. Elias watched him. You've been doing that a lot. The man didn't look up. It's the only part that matters. Elias exhaled slowly. Then point. The man stopped working, just for a moment. Then, go back, he said. Elias frowned. To the house. A beat. Not the garage. Elias's expression didn't change. Then where? The man's voice remained steady. The place you stopped looking. Elias felt it then. A shift, not in the man, in himself, because he knew exactly what that meant. And he didn't want to go there. Orion stood again, moved back to Elias's side, not pulling, not guiding, just present. Elias looked at the man one last time. You still haven't told me who you are, he said. The man didn't respond, not immediately. Then, that depends on what you're willing to see, he said. Elias held his gaze. For a moment, the distance between them felt smaller than it should have. Then Elias turned, walked away. Orion followed. No hesitation. The lake remained silent behind them. The structure stood unchanged. The man returned to his work, as if nothing had happened. But Elias knew better now. Something had. Not in the world around him, in the way he moved through it. He didn't have answers. He didn't have proof, but he had direction. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't walking away from something. He was walking toward it. Elias didn't go to the garage. That was the first thing he decided when he stepped back into the house. The door closed behind him with a soft, final sound, as if the place itself had accepted his return without needing to acknowledge it. The air inside was the same as before, still, dry, carrying the faint weight of time that had been left undisturbed for too long. He stood in the entryway, unmoving, not because he didn't know where to go, because he did. And that was the problem. Orion stepped in behind him, slower this time. The German shepherd didn't move ahead like he had before. He stayed close, just behind Elias's left side, his head slightly lowered, his posture neither tense nor relaxed. Waiting. Not for a command, for a decision. Elias exhaled slowly. He didn't look toward the garage. He didn't need to. Instead, his eyes shifted down the hallway, toward a door he hadn't opened in years. His hand moved before his thoughts caught up. The door creaked slightly as it opened. The room inside was smaller than he remembered. Of course it was. Everything here was. The walls were bare except for faint outlines where something had once been hung. Photos, maybe. The bed sat against the far wall, neatly made in a way that didn't match abandonment. Dust had settled, but not heavily. It was as if the room had been closed, not forgotten. Elias stepped inside. The floor creaked softly under his weight. Orion remained at the doorway for a moment, then entered. This time, the dog didn't move ahead. He stayed near the entrance, watching, observing, as if this space required a different kind of attention. Elias stood in the center of the room, his room, or what used to be. He didn't feel anything at first. No rush of memory, no emotional pull, just distance, as if he were standing in a place that belonged to someone else. Then his eyes shifted to the far corner, where the desk had always been. It was still there, smaller, worn, but intact. Elias walked toward it slowly. His hand brushed against the surface, tracing faint scratches that his mind didn't immediately recognize, but his body did. He had sat here once, spent hours here, but he hadn't thought about it in years, because nothing important had happened here. That's what he had always believed. Orion moved, not quickly, not decisively. He stepped further into the room, circling once, not wide, not searching, just enough to change his angle. Then he stopped, near the wall. Not the desk, not the bed, the wall. He stood there, still. Then did something Elias had never seen before. He leaned, not pressing, just placing the side of his body lightly against the wall, as if aligning himself with something beneath it. Then he turned his head. Looked at Elias, not questioning, not asking, simply holding the space. Elias frowned. That's not it, he said quietly, but he stepped closer anyway. The wall looked normal, plain, painted years ago and left untouched since. Elias ran his hand across it. Nothing. He tapped lightly, solid, no hollow sound. He exhaled through his nose. Nothing here. Orion didn't move. Elias stepped back, looked again. This time, not at the surface, at the edges, where the wall met the floor. There, a slight inconsistency, the trim. One section didn't align perfectly. It was subtle, easy to miss. Elias crouched down. His fingers traced the line slowly, then pressed. Nothing. He shifted pressure, adjusted angle. A soft click. Elias froze, then slowly pulled. A narrow panel slid outward. Behind it, a hidden space, not large, but deep enough. Inside, wrapped in old cloth, lay a bundle. Elias stared at it. Didn't reach for it immediately, because something in his chest had already started to move. Not recognition, something heavier. He unwrapped the cloth. Inside were papers. Not loose notes. Not fragments. Organized. Intentional. He flipped through them. Names, accounts, transactions, and something else. Dates that aligned. Perfectly. Not delayed. Not altered. Clean. Elias's jaw tightened. "This is different," he said under his breath. Orion stepped closer now, standing just beside him. Not looking at the papers, looking at Elias. Elias sat back against the wall, the papers spread in front of him. His mind moved quickly, connecting what he had seen at the bank with what lay in his hands now. The pattern, the delays, the design, and this. The original structure, unaltered, not hidden to be lost, hidden to be found. Elias ran a hand through his hair, his movements slower now. "Why here?" he muttered. Not to Orion, to the room, to the past. There was no answer, not in words, but the logic was there. The garage had been for work, for tools, for things that could be seen. This was something else, something personal, something that required a different kind of decision to uncover. Elias looked down at the papers again, then at the wall, then at Orion. "You knew," he said quietly. Orion didn't react, didn't confirm, didn't deny. He simply stood there, present. Elias gathered the papers carefully, folding them back into the cloth. He didn't rush, didn't treat them like evidence. Not yet. He stood, looked around the room one more time. For the first time since entering, it didn't feel empty. It felt unfinished, like something had been left behind on purpose, not abandoned, preserved. Elias walked toward the door. Orion followed immediately this time. No pause, no hesitation. Outside, the air felt sharper, colder, but clearer. Elias stepped off the porch, adjusting the weight of the bundle in his hand. He didn't look back at the house. He didn't need to, because whatever had been hidden there was no longer hidden. Orion moved beside him, his pace matching Elias's exactly, aligned again. Elias exhaled slowly. He didn't smile, didn't relax, but something in his posture had changed. Not uncertainty, not doubt, direction. He looked toward the road that led back to the lake. Not with hesitation this time, with intent. And for the first time since he arrived, he wasn't following a feeling. He was following something real. The morning did not feel like a beginning. It felt like a point of no return. Elias stood outside the small building that served as the town's meeting hall, the bundle of documents wrapped in worn cloth held loosely in his hand. The structure itself was plain. Wooden siding weathered by years of cold seasons, windows slightly clouded from age rather than neglect. It was not a place built for spectacle. It was built for presence. People were already inside. He could hear the low hum of voices, the shifting of chairs, the occasional pause that suggested recognition more than conversation. This town didn't raise its voice easily. That wasn't going to change today. Orion stood beside him, posture steady, head level with Elias's hip. The dog's amber eyes moved once toward the door, then back to Elias. Not urging, not questioning, just aware. Elias adjusted his grip on the cloth. He didn't look at the house behind him, didn't look at the road that had brought him here. He looked forward, then stepped inside. The room quieted before he reached the center. Not completely, just enough. Enough for attention to shift without needing to be called. Rows of wooden chairs faced a simple podium at the front. People sat or stood in small clusters, their movements minimal, their expressions reserved. This was not a crowd waiting for something to happen. It was a group of people used to things staying the same. At the front of the room stood a woman, Margaret Hale. She was exactly as Elias remembered her, and somehow more. Time had not softened her. It had refined her. She stood tall, posture precise, her figure lean but composed with deliberate control. Her dark hair, now threaded faintly with gray, was pulled back cleanly, not a strand out of place. Her face carried no unnecessary expression, sharp lines, controlled features, the kind that did not reveal emotion unless it served a purpose. Her eyes found Elias immediately. They did not widen, they did not question. They measured, always measured. She wore a long, tailored coat in a deep charcoal shade, the fabric structured, untouched by wear. It contrasted sharply with the room around her. Everything about her was maintained, intentional. Where others aged naturally, she curated. "Elias," she said. Her voice carried clearly without needing volume. "You're back." Elias didn't respond. He didn't need to, because this wasn't a conversation. Deputy Logan Pierce stood off to the side. He hadn't been part of the gathering at first glance, but now that Elias saw him, it was obvious he had been watching the room the entire time. Logan's build was solid, his stance grounded in the kind of quiet readiness that came from years of working in a place where problems didn't escalate quickly, but never truly disappeared either. His short hair had grayed at the edges, his jaw marked by faint stubble that suggested he didn't care enough to keep it perfectly clean. His eyes met Elias's briefly. No signal, no confirmation, just acknowledgement. He wasn't choosing a side. Not yet. Elias walked forward, each step deliberate, measured, not because he was uncertain, because he wasn't. The podium stood empty, waiting. Elias placed the cloth bundle on its surface, unwrapped it slowly. The sound of fabric shifting against wood was louder than it should have been. Or maybe the room had simply grown quieter. Papers spread across the surface, not thrown, not presented with force, placed, one by one. Elias didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at Margaret. He looked at the documents, because they were the only thing in the room that didn't rely on belief. Orion moved before Elias spoke, not toward the crowd, not toward the exit, toward Margaret. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. He stepped forward, closing part of the distance between them, his posture calm but no longer neutral, his head tilted slightly, not in curiosity, not in confusion, in assessment. For a brief moment, Margaret's gaze dropped, not to Elias, not to the papers, but to the dog. And in that moment, something changed, not in her expression, in the space around her, as if the control she carried had encountered something it could not measure. Orion stopped, did not growl, did not bare teeth. He simply stood, watching. And then, he turned away, returning to Elias's side, as if whatever decision had been made was already final. Elias exhaled slowly, then spoke. "There's no accusation here," he said. His voice carried evenly, controlled, not raised. The room leaned in, not physically, but in attention. "This isn't about what anyone thinks happened," he continued. "It's about what was made to look like it did." He lifted one of the pages, held it just high enough to be seen, but not displayed. "Everything here matches," he said. "Until you stop looking at it the way it was meant to be seen." He set it down, picked up another. "Transactions, names, dates, they align, they're clean." A pause. Then, "They're supposed to be." No one interrupted, because there was nothing to interrupt. Elias stepped back slightly from the podium, not retreating, creating space. For 20 years, he said. This was enough. He didn't look at Margaret when he said it. He didn't need to. Not because it was true, he added quietly, because it didn't need to be questioned. The room remained still. Elias let the silence settle. Then he moved aside. Just enough. Nathaniel stepped forward. Slowly, he had been standing near the back of the room, unnoticed by most. His presence blending into the background like he had spent years learning to do. Up close, the contrast between him and Margaret was stark. Where she was maintained, he was worn. Where she was composed, he was restrained. His coat hung loosely, the fabric faded, the edges frayed. His hands, marked by years of work, carried faint traces of oil that no amount of washing could fully remove. But his posture, that had changed. Not stronger, steadier. He didn't look at Margaret immediately. He looked at the room, at the people, as if measuring whether the space itself would hold what he was about to say. Then he spoke. I didn't leave. That was all. No explanation, no defense. Elias watched the reaction. There wasn't one, not outwardly, but something shifted. Not in volume, in perception. People didn't move, but they were no longer standing the same way. Margaret's expression remained unchanged, but her eyes, they no longer held the same certainty, because this wasn't a moment she could control. Not with words, not with silence. Elias stepped forward again, not to add to what Nathaniel had said, to close it. This isn't about proving anything, he said. His voice was quieter now. It's about removing what shouldn't have been there in the first place. He gathered the papers slowly, not hiding them, not protecting them, just taking them back, because their purpose had been served. He looked at Logan briefly. Logan gave the smallest nod. Not agreement, recognition. Elias turned. Orion moved with him immediately. No hesitation, no delay. Nathaniel followed, not behind, not ahead, beside. Outside, the air felt different, not warmer, not lighter, just clearer. Elias stepped down from the building, the weight in his hand unchanged. But something else had shifted. He didn't look back, because there was nothing left there that needed his attention. The truth hadn't been announced. It hadn't been argued. It had simply been placed where it could no longer be ignored. And that was enough. Orion walked beside him, calm, steady. The town remained quiet, unchanged. But Elias knew it wasn't. There are moments in life when the truth does not arrive like thunder. It comes quietly. After years of silence, after wounds we thought would never close, after stories we believed without ever questioning. And sometimes what we call a miracle is not something that changes the world in an instant, but something that patiently waits until our hearts are ready to see what was always there. God does not rush truth. He allows time to shape us, to humble us, to teach us the difference between what we hear and what is real. In our daily lives, we may not face the same battles as Elias, but we all carry misunderstandings, broken relationships, and unanswered questions. And sometimes, the person we thought had hurt us was the one who sacrificed the most for us. The miracle is not just in the truth being revealed. The miracle is in having the courage to accept it, to forgive, and to begin again. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Your story may help someone else who is still searching for answers. Share this video with someone who needs hope today. And if you believe in stories that remind us of faith, truth, and second chances, please subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing more meaningful stories like this. May God bless you, guide your path, protect your loved ones, and bring peace to your heart, wherever you are watching from.